Welcome back to Real Conversations with Nora for my 48th episode. My topic of discussion this week is the importance of building wealth. And joining me today is Evan Stephans. Evan is a native of Memphis, Tennessee. He graduated from Howard University in 2014 with a BA in finance. He is married to his childhood sweetheart, and together they have 2 children and 1 on the way. He is a licensed wealth management advisor with the #1 free planning company in the country, Capital Financial Group. Evan is passionate about helping God's people see the importance of building wealth, not only for themselves, but their families as well. So, Evan, thank you so much for being my guest today on Real Conversations with Nora. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Nora. Like I said, I definitely appreciate the opportunity to come and share. And like I said, at the end of the day, I hope our discussion is valuable and that people's lives are enriched as a result of this.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So can you talk about what building wealth looks like and why it is so important for us to build it?
Sure. So I'll say this. I think the natural human tendency when we talk about building wealth is to rush to the monetary element of it.
Right.
Yeah, I want to make X amount of dollars over, this time horizon. But the reality is what I've learned, Nora, is that real wealth is very much so comprehensive in nature. For example, I think about relational wealth. I think about spiritual wealth. Obviously, financial wealth is of the utmost importance. However, I've studied this market and this industry of ultra high net worth individuals and just people who have been graced to accumulate a lot of money. And the people who, granted, there are a lot of individuals out there who have the most miserable lives ever. Because quite frankly, we both know that finances or the significant accumulation of wealth only magnifies what's ultimately going on the inside of you. And so it augments whatever is going on. And so for me, it has taught me over the years, and then from connecting with people who are just in the highest, tax brackets or just multimillionaires, I've discovered that they've told me that even after you've amassed all this wealth, that you can never discount the significance of the spiritual wealth or the relational wealth. And so to answer your question, what is building wealth? To me, building wealth is simply, it's a consistent and strategic investments in a particular area. So for example, physical wealth, what does that mean? Working out and having the proper diet. Financial wealth, that means having the due diligence to make the proper investments, whether that's via real estate, whether that's via the stock market, whether that's via, venture capital. It could be a number of different things that you could ultimately accumulate wealth with. What's another one? Relational wealth. At the end of the day, you want all the money in the world does not compare to the most significant people in our lives. And so, again, there has to be this balanced perspective, even as we talk about what building true wealth even looks like. And so for me, financial wealth is obviously important, but the spiritual wealth and the physical wealth are equally as important from my vantage point.
And you said something about that was key, the relationship, and you can chime in on this one or tell me if I'm going in the right direction. It's the journey onto that road of that wealth. What's happening? What did you experience? How did it, was it good? Was it bad? Or, can you just kind of talk a little, is that what you were referring to as in those different components, like the physical, the health, the financial, the relationship? Each piece of those components, as you travel to each one of them, there's something that obviously happens to us in the inside that makes each one of those things, or our desire for each one of those things, better yet, to be successful in those areas.
Absolutely. So I guess the point, I guess the direction I'm trying is that we can't discount one over the other, because they all have significant value. And I was using the financial one as an example, because be honest, everybody wants to accumulate a lot of money.
Right,
because
right, right.
money ultimately allows people time freedom. Time is our most valuable asset. And
Hmm.
so people can have more time. They have more time to spend with the people they love most. Plus, they have more freedom, more
Right,
flexibility,
right.
which in our macroeconomic environment,
Uh-huh.
that's not the typical option, or that's not the
Hmm.
typical lifestyle of the majority of Americans. Most Americans in the typical ideology is, hey, go to college, get this degree that may or may not even be relevant once you graduate,
Right.
get this job, work for 50 years, and hopefully you have enough money saved up when you're in your older years to kind of have that kind of financial flexibility. But again, that's why if you could think through strategically, how do you build passive income streams? How do
Hmm.
you start businesses? How do you invest early on so
Hmm.
that you could reap some of these dividends and some of the financial benefits of that early? It
Hmm.
just creates a different lifestyle
Right.
for most individuals.
Right. I read something the other day. It says your money mindset is how you think about money and relate to it. Our mindset is key because um, the action of our behaviors. None of our actions or behaviors happen in a, he said, none of your actions or your behaviors happen in a vacuum. They always spring from the thoughts of your mindsets. And then he said, I want you to be real with yourself and own up to whether your thoughts about money that
Right.
you have about money move you in a positive direction every day or are holding you back and sabotaging your ability to get ahead. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's golden because for a number of reasons, but specifically because he talked about at least what my interpretation is. He's talking about people's internal money blueprint,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
everybody has an internal money blueprint that ultimately dictates their philosophy and their relationship with money.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's a great read. One of my favorite books talks about the secret of the millionaire mind, and in that book, uh, the author he talks about essentially what creates this money blueprint for people, and he said he could really break it down into three key areas that ultimately dictate the conditioning and the programming of a
Mhm,
person as
mhm,
far as their relationship with money. He talks about experiential,
mhm,
what you experienced with money growing up, verbal. What did you hear? Like, what were your parents' philosophy around money?
mhm.
You've heard the age old quote. Money don't grow on trees, or
Right.
money don't do this. And I know we hear this all funny, but a lot of that stuff plays into the psychology of how people ultimately view and
Mhm,
engage with money down the line.
mhm,
And also, modeling would be the third element. What did you see? What did you see in addition to what they said? What did you see them do as far as stewarding their finances? Did they ever bring you into the investment discussion? Did they ever talk to you about managing money finances? Because in all three of those areas, again, they shape who we are, or our money identity. And so
mhm,
if any of that is unhealthy, or is, to your point, like self-sabotaging, like
mhm,
we have to be very, diligent about rewriting that narrative
mhm,
around how we see and understand
mhm.
money, wealth, and the whole nine.
I think too that it has a lot to do with, like you said, how we grew up. I mean, I grew up with a single mom. My mom was single, raising four daughters, and
Mm,
so there was no conversation. She worked, she did everything. There was no conversation with us about money, um, you know. Or I mean, she was an excellent. Everything I learned about money, it's only because of her ability, probably of the lack of her, and then her ability to manage it well because we didn't have a whole lot of it
right.
versus somebody who comes along and sits you down and talks about finances. I'm reading a book right now. It's Time to Advance by Pastor Pierce. And one of the things that he's talking about is us thinking like God thinks. And he talks about Jewish people
Hmm.
and how they're raised and to think about money and finances, and throughout their life when they're 3 years old, they learn how to speak Hebrew.
Yep.
Learn at 3, and by the time they're 6 they can have a conversation with you. And
Right.
so but because I think us as a people, not all of our people, but a great deal of our people,
Right.
um a family or a single mother households, and mothers are working to survive, to take care of their children, and so there's
Right.
not that experience Not to say that it's ever too late. It's not too late. It's never too late. So can you talk a little bit about that? That it is never too late, even though you didn't grow up that way, even though you didn't have that education, and even though you didn't have that person to pour into your life. I'm thinking about my mother and going all the way back to my great great grandparents, my great grandfather Archibald, who came from Barbados.
Mm,
Wealthy. He was wealthy, but when he came to the States, it was so much racism and he couldn't deal with it.
right,
So therefore, there were issues. And so then of course it dwindled all down and it kept getting, it kept dwindling and dwindling. And so therefore there was not that state of, okay, this is what we do. This is the direction we go in. And there are a lot of families like that
right.
to this day. So as a young person, and of course, you growing up with two great parents, your father being a pastor, your mother being a great woman of God, your family and household probably was different than the average young man going who you got to go to college, who didn't get to go to college, and so this is a whole big ramification for us as a people.
Right.
And to me, it's just broken down into categories where we are in every household. So can you kind of elaborate a little bit about that?
Was like how I grew up, or the
Well, just about what, the fact that it's never too late.
oh
Even
yeah,
though you might have grown up like that, but this, I don't know if that's something you were thinking about when you grew up, or if that's even something your father probably talked to you about, or if it was just your decision. But the fact that there are, in this world that we live in, with our and not maybe just our people, just probably people in general. It doesn't just have to be African Americans. It's
right,
people in general, and how you grew up and what your parents had and what your parents didn't have. I kind of think about like my great grandparents, how the sharecroppers, how they dealt with things. I mean, if we look at the Tulsa, the Black Wall Street, they weren't able to. White people didn't want to shop with them.
right,
They didn't want to sell. They didn't want to allow them to buy houses. So what did they do? They created their own wealth
right,
to create what it is that they created in Tulsa. But because what happens is, to me, is that they didn't want to deal with them, so they created their own. But then when they stopped shopping with
yep,
them and started shopping with their own self, and they created their own wealth, and they realized they had buying power,
yep.
and then the other side didn't like that. So we know what happened from there. So can you talk a little bit about that? Just what your thought is on how it's never too. I guess what I'm saying is
Yes.
too late.
No, absolutely. I always like to before as I frame the question, well, as I frame my response, I
Mm-hmm.
always like to call out the cultural ideology and then put that alongside God's philosophy when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to wealth creation.
Mm-hmm.
So cultural ideology is, again, work this job 40, 50 years, hopefully you have enough money for retirement, etc. But again, in that cultural ideology, it lends itself for people to believe that, hey, once I hit 50, once I hit 60, 65, etc., my time has then passed me by.
Mm,
That's a cultural lie.
right.
That has nothing to do, because last time I checked, God said that your gift makes room for you, and there was no time stamp on that.
No.
Your gift, like the gift that God has uniquely given you, never runs out until He
Mm,
calls you home to be with Him.
right.
And so, with that said, I think people understanding that they're, well, breaking free from the ideology that their time limit has elapsed, or that their race is now over just because they just hit a certain age limit, is the first step. Step number two, I think, Bible also talks about we overcome by the word of our testimony. I think that statement is comprehensive in nature, because I know, for example, let's take KFC, for example. He didn't start till he was plus 50,
Mhm.
multi-million-dollar franchise. Like, there are so many stories out there where people start business in their 50s and 60s and become, wildly successful. And so I just, those two, I think if you can break through the ideology and understand that, hey, no, people have actually become very, very successful financially, relationally, and so forth in their 50s, in their 60s, I think that would then get, or at least it should give people the tools to know that, hey, my time is actually now. That God still has a plan.
Mhm.
Kind of readjusting the art of the possible, what people believe can ultimately happen at their particular juncture in life. And once they adjust it, it's a matter of just going after it, praying, seeking counsel with whatever their respective business venture, product, or service that you're offering. And at the end of the day, leave the results up to God. Don't
Right.
don't don't tap out simply because you self-sabotage due to your limiting belief system.
Right.
Uh, allow God to handle the results. And the cool thing about that is, God is more interested in your success than you are.
Right.
So it kind of is very much so liberating when you say,
Mhm.
hey, God has created one, I'm still breathing, meaning I
Right.
still have a divine purpose. If you have that divine purpose and you understand that God's giving you a gift, that means that's a service that's supposed to be rendered onto mankind. That's going to
Mhm.
bring value to people. That's that's
Right.
that's that's loving people. That's serving people well by giving them your gift. And once you give them the gift, God does the rest.
Right.
We plant the seeds, He does the watering. That's with
Right.
everything, not just
Right.
with sharing the gospel. Like that's also like with our gifting as well. And so I think when people can grapple that mentally and break free from that, they'll be
Mhm.
on the right trajectory.
Mhm. I heard something one time that said, somebody said that if you're looking for a service and you looked and you search and you Google, and Google, you can find anything on Google, and you can't find it on Google, that's a business waiting to get started. So you need to do it.
No, absolutely.
The second question to ask, he said, yourself, is whether you have the right financial focus. What is your right financial focus? In other words, do you know your priorities, value, and manage money in alignment with them? So what's your thought about that? And I want to say in your alignment with God. I mean, like you said, the Bible says your gifts will make room for you and put you before great people. But I was telling someone the other day, but you got to be in line. You got to be in
Yep,
line. So when the season comes, it doesn't pass you by, because it can
exactly.
pass you by. So what's your thought about that? Just having the right financial focus. I think, you get to the point where maybe you have to get to that point where you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, like sick and tired of being broke, sick and tired of saying, I can't do this and I can't do that. When we know we have the ability to do so, because the word of God says, I can do all things through Christ. So there's a conflict there if I'm saying I can't and God says that I can.
Right,
So can talk a little bit about that, our financial focus, what our priorities are, and what we value.
right. That's a great question. I think first order of operations is to address having financial vision, and that's simply after you pray, after you fast, get along with God to see ultimately what He wants.
Mm,
Because when you talk about alignment, it starts with Him. Because here's the thing. We can sometimes get so quick into creating, and in my case, Evan Stevens' visions as opposed to God's vision,
right,
which they can easily go in separate directions and
right,
subtly too. And so I always say a prerequisite for having vision is spending time in God's presence via prayer and fast. Start to figure out what He wants.
right,
Because when you figure out what He wants, the path is already paved.
right,
Everything is laid out for you. Your
right,
connections, your resources, everything is laid out for you.
right,
And from that, developing a financial vision, like what's the end goal in
right,
mind? Like when you think about a financial utopia, what is it? Like
right.
I ask people, like, what's your net worth goal and why? Like, what's your legacy? Like,
Hmm.
what kind of generational partnerships do you want to? Like, what
Right,
kind of generational impact do you ultimately want to have? Because
right,
money is people think that's the finish line, but in reality, I think a proper perspective of money is just a tool.
right,
That's all it is, a
right,
tool for service and impact. So let's say if you were to be blessed with 10 million, 50 million, a billion, 10 billion, like why should God even trust you with that?
right.
Like, are you about to serve it? Like if it was to be handed over to you today, how would you be committed to self-indulgence, serving yourself, or would you think about financial vision and alignment with God? It's very clear that God cared about the least of these, the marginalized, etc. Like, it- would you care for those people? Would you love them and serve them with your financial resources,
Right.
or would only your world
Hmm.
be better enhanced? And so
Right.
that was my long-winded answer of saying that, hey, I think it starts with prayer and fasting to get true alignment, but then two, figuring out the why behind the resources. Because
Right.
again, I think ideology is people think I've arrived because I've made X amount of dollars, and then we get slack and we get uh kind of lackadaisical with our stewardship of
Right.
the money that we have. because we feel like we've arrived. No, you haven't. Because reality is that's God's money. And so truly treating God's money like, no, I'm a manager of his money, and my job is to maximize the investment that God has given me based on the money he gives me. That's one. Two, my job is also to invest and leverage the money in a way that's in alignment with God's heart, God's people, God's mission, God's kingdom, right? And that, I think both of those could together make a for comprehensive alignment.
Right. Good. He also says take advantage of the right financial tools and products like retirement accounts, insurance, health savings accounts, and credit cards. He said this gives you a big leg up on becoming rich. What's your thought on that?
I think everybody's situation is drastically different. It's kind of hard to. There's no cookie cutter model out there, in my opinion, in my experience, that fits every individual. Everybody has drastically different vision. Everybody has drastically different goals, concerns, bad habits or good habits.
Right.
So I'm not really big on the blanket statements of, oh yeah, take advantage of great products and services. You know, obviously, if it makes sense for your situation, you know, hop on top of it. But again, I think somebody should, you know, always consult with somebody who's a licensed professional who they can trust and who's competent, who can kind of speak to, who can kind of understand their comprehensive situation and then strategically create a plan around that. But yeah, as far as like building wealth, I mean, it's for me, what I've discovered at least, is that most of the people, just everybody who I know and who's built a significant amount of wealth, they've done three things. They have significant investments in the stock market, they've started businesses, and they've invested in real estate.
Right. Okay.
And I always say, because you got to think about it like this, or at least I always encourage people to think about it like this. If everything could go wrong with your financial situation or your place of employment, and nothing changes about your financial situation, you probably should reconsider the business model you have set up for your life. Because I mean, a great salary is fantastic, but if that company,
folds,
triples overnight, that doesn't mean anything for you. You're an employee,
right?
You still your salary isn't changing. However, if I had 20% equity stake in this company, that means everything for me,
right?
And no, this is not a subtle like bashing or diminishing of the 9 to 5.
Right.
9 to 5 is a blessing. I think you just leverage it properly, so that, hey, if you want to do your 9 to 5 for 40 years, great. But also, I think there should be an additional stream of revenue, right? That could ultimately give you that time freedom. Because at the end of the day, they could let you go tomorrow. And so you want to think strategically and comprehensively about that, so that you're in the best financial situation, regardless of what happens tomorrow.
Right. And it could fold. The company could fold. It could close its doors.
Right.
Through history, we hear that over and over and over and over. I mean, especially during this pandemic, there are so many places that have gone out of businesses. I mean, big places like Golden Corral, shutting down, or stores shutting down, or because of the pandemic, but people are losing their jobs. And we put so much emphasis, and I agree with you 100%. We put so much emphasis, and there's nothing wrong if that's what you choose to do.
Right.
But the word of God says in Deuteronomy, I, the Lord thy God, give you the ability to produce wealth. And I personally don't believe he gave it to us to produce it for someone else. He gave it to produce it for ourselves. So, definitely that was a good thought. He said it's important to question, to ponder. He said it is important. He said it is an important question to ponder, is whether you're taking the right actions and following a plan with your money. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that is a sure sign that you need to create and stick to a spending plan. So can you talk a little bit about that?
No, absolutely. So one, I think that the age-old statistic, I think it's even gone up. It's close to like 70. Last time I checked, it was 70, but I think I saw a recent report that says close to 78. But 78% of Americans do live, in fact, paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
And granted, some are, have unique circumstances where it's not really their fault. However, there are a number of individuals where it's not an income
Mhm.
problem; it's simply a infrastructure problem,
Right,
meaning they don't have the proper infrastructure to manage their
right.
finances properly.
Right.
And even going back to uh, the Word of God in Genesis 2, it talks about how essentially God withheld like rain and produce in the
Mhm.
garden because there was no manager. And with the Greek word is like arrogant or something like that. But point is, he was talking about how he withheld all of this progress and this success because there was no manager there to cultivate the garden. And so a lot of times, I think we have to really dig deep into understanding, like, hey, am I the issue here,
Right.
or is it really I don't have enough money? Because some people, like, again, it's real, and we've all been in that situation where we
Right.
have bad money habits. Uh, but sometimes things are withheld, like our success is held up because there's no proper infrastructure there. And any success that we have is it's gonna be this black hole that's
Right.
constantly draining any success. So even if we do increase income, most people
Right.
have what they call lifestyle inflation as
Right.
well, where their lifestyle increases. So you're
Right.
still in the same financial situation you were
Right.
when you made
Right.
$20,000 less.
Right.
But again, you mentioned the part about the management. People we have to be able to dive deep into our financial situation to understand
Right.
our cash flow. What's
Right.
coming in? What's coming out?
Right.
Because from there you understand your discretionary income,
Right.
meaning you understand the exact
Right.
resources you
Right.
have to allocate towards investments,
Right.
whether that's real estate, stock
Right.
market, and so forth.
Right.
Most don't, to be honest with you. So
I think it's important too that I know I went I'm doing some renovations in my home, so I'm doing my total prayer room over, and I went to buy new furniture, and of course
mhm.
I went in, and the first thing he asked me is, "How do you want to finance this? You know, do you
Uh-huh.
want to get? Do you want to? What do you want to sign up for finances?" I said, "No, I'm paying for it. I said, "I'm paying for it today." And he said, "Oh, okay." Because they're not accustomed to that. They're not
Yeah.
accustomed to that. So I gave him my card. The thing with me is when that card comes in, there's no payment on it. I pay it in full because I'm not trying to give the credit card company no interest. But
Yep.
what it's doing for me, so I want to talk a little bit about that. What it's doing for me, it keeps raising my credit score because they
Mhm.
see I have good payment habits and so forth. And I think that that's, I always tell people, you start where you are with if your credit is bad and you're attempting to restore it and you're attempting to get a good financial plan for yourself, start where you are and then just take it step by step and then go from there. So before closing, lastly, can you just talk about that? Because that really, to me, is an important part of the advice that we need as we build this thing called wealth, as we build our financial platform. Because your platform, your wealth, your financial situation could be on quicksand or it could be on
Yep.
concrete. I want mine to be on concrete. But again, I think again, it's just something that I learned. My mother was real good at it, even though she didn't have the money, but she could manage that money. She could tell you today and say, Evan, I lent you $40.39. You didn't send the 39 cents.
Mhm.
Okay. So it's just the mindset of changing our mindset towards it. I changed my mindset towards I don't want to be in debt. I don't want to owe. I don't want no one calling me and saying I owe. So as we build this thing called wealth, we want to build it on solid and not quicksand. And the word of God tells us that too. Build your house on a solid rock, not quicksand.
Right. All right. And Proverbs talks about how we should know the state of our flocks and give our hearts to like their care,
You're
essentially.
right.
And
Right.
doing that obviously in biblical time, that was currency, that was money,
Mm-hmm.
that was cash flow, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to your point, like you said, I always try to reverse it for the clients that I service, and so I say, hey, if I was to when you think about financial infrastructure and how will you manage your money, I'm asking you a question.
Mm-hmm.
How much are you like? What's your asset acquisition strategy? Like, how much do you plan on investing in the market, real estate, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth this year, and the following year after that, so we can have a long term focus. That way, once we have our strategic, 5 year, 10 year, 30 year plan,
Mm-hmm.
at that point, it's just by commitment and accountability. You mentioned the
Right.
money mindset. I know historically we have not been as open when it comes to our financial situation,
Right.
but I think just having the
That's a good
discernment and
point.
trying to connect with the right people, that's the healthiest thing because this is a very intimate subject. It's like most people are balled up when it comes to finances. However, like with the right community, it can help augment and keep
Right.
you in a mud. It can help expedite you to achieving your financial goals because you're a part of a community that you can be transparent and open with
Right.
about your financial habits.
Mm.
And so those would be the I guess the 2 points that I would mention towards that.
Good, good, good. Well, Evan, I want to thank you for being our guest on Real Conversations with Nora today. Are there any last minute comments that you'd like to share with the audience before leaving?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. As far as last comments, I'll say this. You mentioned something earlier about it's never too late to start. It's not. Your race is not over. Again, for every person who's ever doubted themselves, like there's a success story out there
Right.
where people have just blown it out of the water.
Right.
When it comes to starting a business, whether it's in the stock market or it's real estate or whatever the case could be.
Mhm.
Again, people, it's possible.
Right.
It really is possible. That's
Right.
not some facetious, like that's not like some just flippant comment I'm making.
Right.
I study market, I study these stories and
Right.
these narratives all the time. Regardless of your race as well, it
Right.
crosses all racial boundaries
Right.
as far as like the art of the possible.
Right.
With regardless of your age and so forth.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that'll be my last comments. And like I said, I'm the three. Lastly, I'll say the three markets that I primarily service are business owners, executives, athletes, and clergy. And so, if you have any questions for me, I'll be more than happy to talk to you all offline to see if there's any way I can add value, and we could go from there.
Can you tell them how they can find you?
Yes, you can reach out to me via email. My email address is Evan Stephans, EvanStephens at financialguide.com. Again, that's Evan Stephens at financialguide.com. That's my email address. That's the quickest way to reach me. I typically respond within 24 to 48 hours max. And so, like I said, I'll be more than happy to connect with you and offer any kind of advice that would be suitable.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. So once again, I want to thank you for your insight on today's topic. And to my Real Conversation with Nora audience, please follow us on social media on BWOT, on Instagram on BWOT MFG, and on Facebook at Business Women on the Move for God. Visit my website at BWOTMFG.com and sign up for our new programs. And make sure you stop by our retail store where you can find lots of great items, not only for yourself and your family, as well as your friends. Also, ask your friends to watch the show each week and share it with others. And I look forward to seeing you next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Real Conversations with Nora. I want you to have a blessed and prosperous week. God bless you.